Seaside, Oregon. A summer afternoon, so ordinary it feels borrowed from memory. Families spread blankets on sand still warm from the morning sun. Kids chase foam at the waterline. The Pacific glows the particular gray-blue color postcards, try to copy, and never quite get right. It looks eternal. It isn't. The first warning isn't the siren. It's the sudden quiet, like every gull decided to leave at once. Then the sound rises, low, mechanical, uncertain at first, then swelling into a full wail that rolls through the streets. You have 15 minutes. Panic makes time elastic. Parents call for kids still in the surf. Someone fumbles car keys. Another drops a phone that disappears into wet sand. Engines cough. Dead battery. People shout directions that no one hears. You run. You remember what the sign said during the safety drill. NOAA's maps give you a 15-minute window from quake to wave. In 2011, Japan tested that window, and 40% didn't reach high ground, even with a week's warning. You glance at the faded blue sign that reads elevation 10, for the nearest hill rises to 50, a mile inland, a mile already gridlocked. From here, brake lights stretch like a red river towards safety that no one will reach in time. Try it. Stand up right now. Walk to your door. Imagine doing that uphill, with a child in your arms, surrounded by 50,000 others on the same road. 15 minutes. The exact countdown between watching the beautiful horizon and drowning in your own front yard. The reason lies 60 miles offshore, where the ocean floor is doing something impossible. 60 miles offshore, where the continental shelf falls into the abyss, the Pacific hides its oldest secret. Down there, the Juan de Fuca plate is trying to slide beneath the North American plate, but it's stuck, locked tight, the way a loaded spring holds before it snaps. For 3 centuries, that lock is held. Each day, the ocean pushes harder, bending the continent upward, storing enough force to shift cities west in seconds and lift the seafloor like a trapdoor. Beneath 2 miles of water, the seabed groans under pressure no instrument can truly measure. The ridge compresses and holds, century after century, while the surface above looks calm, eternal. Fishing boats drift across a fuse that's been burning for 300 years. When that fuse reaches its end, and it will, the pressure will rip through the crust along a 600-mile fault. In an instant, a section of seafloor will lurch upward by more than 30 feet, displacing billions of tons of water. For a few seconds, gravity and ocean will argue, and then gravity will win. The result will not be a wave, but a wall. Scientists call it the Cascadia Subduction Zone. And in 1987, when researchers finally mapped that silent tug, the data shocked them into silence. For centuries, the Cascadia Subduction Zone was invisible, an unproven fault buried beneath miles of ocean. Then, in 1987, scientists noticed something that shouldn't exist. Across hundreds of miles, satellite instruments and tide gauges began showing that the coastline wasn't standing still. It was creeping backward, just a few millimeters each year, as if North America was holding its breath, compressed, tense, unable to release. At first, researchers blamed instrumental drift, bad calibration, temperature shifts, normal tidal noise. They recalibrated, double-checked, replaced sensors, but the pattern stayed. The entire Pacific Northwest was flexing inland, bending under pressure no one could see. One geophysicist, Tom Heaton, ran the energy calculations. When he saw how much strain had built beneath the coast, he quietly moved his family inland. That single act said more than any report ever could. In labs from Seattle to Portland, researchers began piecing the evidence together. Seafloor maps taped across walls, tide charts layered over decades of seismic readings. They searched for where the motion stopped, for the edge of the invisible pull. Instead, every dataset traced the same hidden line, a continuous fault running 600 miles beneath the ocean floor. The pattern was undeniable. The room went quiet. Every researcher understood what the data meant. Millions of people were living on a fault that had been silent for far too long. The Cascadia Subduction Zone was no longer theoretical. It was a geological loaded gun, locked and ready after 3 centuries of silence. The discovery redrew the West Coast's future, but it also forced one terrifying question. When was the last time this gun fired? The answer wouldn't come from rock samples or instruments. It would come from Japan's forgotten tsunami of 1700. January 27th, 1700. Midnight along Japan's eastern coast. Villages were dark when the sea arrived. A wall of water 10 meters high, surging inland without a single tremor of warning. 10 meters of ocean crashed through streets and rice fields. By morning, when survivors emerged, they had no explanation for what had struck. In the archives, scribe called it the orphan tsunami, a wave born from nowhere, unconnected to any felt earthquake. For generations, it was treated as a mystery, even a supernatural event. The Japanese knew their own faults well, but this wave didn't fit any of them. Centuries later, and across the Pacific, another mystery waited in the mud of Oregon's coast. Along the tidal marshes, geologists found ghost forests, stands of cedar stumps preserved in tidal mud, trees that died suddenly and were buried under layers of marine sand. They cut vertical columns of soil, revealing a perfect fingerprint, dark peat, then a thin sheet of ocean sand, then more peat above. That single band of sediment marked a violent flood from the sea, a tsunami. Radiocarbon dating placed the die-off in winter 1699 to 1700. Tree ring analysis made it even clearer. Every cedar stopped growing at the same moment, mid-season, as if the entire forest had drowned in one night. The coastal tribes had known all along. Muckaw and Clatsop oral histories told of the earth shaking through the night, the ocean rising to swallow villages, forests collapsing into marsh. For 3 centuries, those stories were dismissed as legend. The ghost forests proved they were eyewitness accounts, truth carried by memory. In the 1990s, a U.S. Geological Survey geologist named Brian Atwater compared these ghost forests to translated Japanese records from 1700. The dates matched. The wave height matched. Suddenly, the impossible made sense. A trans-Pacific tsunami, orphaned from its source by distance and time. 2 mysteries, separated by 5,000 miles and 300 years, were the same event. The evidence was undeniable, and had been lying in coastal mud for 3 centuries, waiting for someone to read it. 9 hours after the Cascadia Fault snapped, its wave had reached Japan's shore. The orphan wave had a parent after all, and that parent was awakening again. For the first time, the Pacific Northwest Silence had a timestamp. The last rupture struck in 1700. The average interval between quakes is roughly 500 years, but the one before that came only 240 years earlier. There's no predictable pattern, only probability. And probability says the silence is getting restless. The silence hasn't been peace. It's pressure, 3 centuries of it, building beneath the edge of a continent. Locked plates grinding together, millimeter by millimeter, storing energy beneath cities that have forgotten what the last one felt like. Scientists have been watching that pressure grow. A network of GPS arrays and seafloor sensors now tracks the crust itself bending. Oregon and Washington creeping eastward a few millimeters per year, like lungs drawing breath before a scream. The last rupture struck in 1700. The one before that, roughly 240 years earlier. We're already inside the window. The U.S. Geological Survey estimates the odds of another magnitude 9.0 or greater Cascadia event within the next 50 years at 10 to 15%. That's a higher probability than most people would ever accept for financial risk. Yet entire cities sit on the fault itself. If the plates fail all at once, the rupture will stretch 600 miles, from Northern California to Vancouver Island. The shaking could last 5 minutes. Most earthquakes end in seconds. 5 minutes is an eternity, long enough to collapse bridges, snap pipelines, and turn solid ground into quicksand through a process called liquefaction. Then comes the ocean. In some coastal towns, residents would have 10 minutes to reach high ground before a wall of water arrives. That's less time than it takes to find your car keys. Emergency managers have run the simulations. Tsunami inundation maps show 30-foot waves swallowing towns from a shoreline to half a mile inland. Seattle's port goes dark for months. Interstate 5 buckles in dozens of places. Power grids serving 10 million people fail. And for those caught inside the zone, no power for months, no running water, hospitals on failing generators, bridges down, 1 million people stranded on the wrong side of the rupture, waiting for help that can't arrive. Pull up a map of your coastline. Find the tsunami evacuation route. Now imagine it at night, in winter, with 50,000 others trying to use it. And then the quiet returns. A quiet that feels like the breath between heartbeats. The same silence that came before 1700. Only this time, we know what silence means. The coastline looks calm now. Families still spread blankets on Seaside Beach. Tourists photograph Haystack Rock. But beneath that calm, the continent is loading the same spring that snapped in 1700. And this time, 10 times as many people live in its shadow. For the people who lived here long before maps and fault lines, this story was never lost. They told of the night the sea pulled away and returned as a wall. Villages vanished, and new ones were built farther inland. The first warnings weren't written in seismographs. They were spoken in stories. Today, blue evacuation towers stand along the coast, vertical refuges painted bright against the sky. Some towns run annual drills. Warning systems track tremors in real time. But the towers that exist can shelter hundreds. The towns they guard hold thousands. And in a 5-minute earthquake, even the best laid plans become guesses made in chaos. We've built towers of steel and concrete, painted them blue, and run drills. We've given ourselves 15 minutes to survive a power that has waited 5 centuries. But no plan can hold back what memory warns about. When the Cascadia Fault releases again, it will start with 5 minutes of violence and end in stillness. Roads will split, bridges buckle, alarms echo, and then silence. The land will have exhaled. Only this time, we know what silence means. Because it isn't peace. The evacuation towers stand painted blue against the Great Pacific. On summer days, tourists photograph them like sculptures, framing the ocean behind them. They don't read the plaques. They don't ask what the towers mean. And 60 miles offshore, the plates keep pulling.